This is a quick video recording showing some airbrushing I did using this Israeli Sandgrey on some of the 6mm scale GHQ models. I mixed some gloss varnish in with that Lifecolor, and that's the Vallejo gloss varnish. I'm just doing a test spray there before I go on to the actual tank. It's an Iwata HPC Plus airbrush, and I've got a little air extraction booth that I use here which I'm filming in. The model's on a steel base and just connected there via magnet onto a Corsair engineering flight stand, which just makes it easy for me to hold the model and paint, well, airbrush even. I've turned the sound of the airbrush and the extraction booth off because they're both very noisy, otherwise I would talk over this while I was actually doing the airbrushing instead of doing the voiceover after the filming. You can see here I'm just going on quite lightly. Generally speaking with airbrushing, at least my technique with airbrushing is to try and get the paint on without any kind of puddling or without the paint actually looking wet. I mean, that's the ultimate aim, is that it goes on and it almost looks like it's going on dry. Maybe that's probably quite a good beginner's tip actually, because if you start airbrushing and you're going on really heavy and you're getting it pooling and you're looking at a lot of liquid wet paint on the model, you're probably putting on too much and it's going on too heavily. So the idea to combat that is to just very light, small strokes, not releasing a lot of paint, and I'm using pressures of about 15 psi with this Lifecolor paint. One challenge where you may end up putting on a little bit too much paint, and it sometimes catches me out, is trying to get into details like the gaps between the tracks there and the wheels. Because it's a narrow opening, you have to sort of go in close with the airbrush to try and get the paint in, but you may end up then putting too much paint on the areas around that gap as you're trying to get the paint into the tiny nooks and crannies. You just have to be careful really to try and watch you're not overloading that paint onto that model, especially at 6mm scale, because they're so small they're almost done before you've even pressed the button down on the airbrush. Switching now to the Abrams tank, you can see that the Abrams has an even lower profile than that Israeli tank that I was just airbrushing, and I've put in 2 piano wire aerials which were drilled into the back there to add some detail, and just being very careful again when I go around to make sure that the paint goes on without that heavy watery look to it, just trying to get it on there dry. And to do that I often go over the same spot a couple of times very lightly, and that way the paint builds up, and you can do that in one sitting. You don't need to go straight. You don't need to leave the figures for any period of time for them to dry. Some people do. You could do that. You could leave the figures with that initial coat, leave them for a few hours, come back and then do a second coat. That's another approach to try and avoid overdoing it and getting too much liquid pooling on the model and then losing the detail. One other thing to remember if you're starting to do airbrushing is to have a couple of test subjects. I normally have these in my collection. There'll be the odd miniature model that I bought and I ended up not liking, or I built an army or sold an army and ended up with a leftover miniature. And I often have one of those around when I'm starting a new project. So with this set I had an old missile launcher that which was a metal Ground Zero Games 15mm one, and I just kept that handy. And when I started this process, you can't see it here obviously, I haven't put it into this video, but I airbrushed it before I airbrushed these vehicles, and it just gets you into the groove and into the mood for the airbrushing and allows you to test your paint mix on the model before you start on the real miniatures, which obviously you don't want to make a mistake on. So if you carry that test model through and finish it, you can then do things like washes on it and other weathering as part of the plan to paint the rest of the models in your set in the batch. That way you could even do a wash on that test subject and just see how it looks before again you start applying enamel washes and things which are difficult to remove. Thanks for listening in to this very short update.